And the other phrase was, lead me to your heart. The only way to be led to God's heart is by way of the cross. So you get rid of yourself. Then you find God's heart. We're following the theme of the small group study. Those of you that may not be participating in small group study, that's fine. You don't have to get up and leave. We're doing a 5-Sunday series on the subjects that are being discussed tonight and each Sunday night in the small groups. And again, if you're not a part of the small group, you still will hear a masterpiece of a sermon that will be dynamic and life-changing. So, I hope I don't get any rolled eyes here. I don't have that exciting of a life, and so I don't have that many illustrations. But I kind of felt, I shouldn't say kind of, I felt impressed to approach the subject that is next in discussion in the small group, that we as humans are broken. There's something wrong with us, something wrong with our world. As an illustration of some of that, I want to mention, or I want to use as an illustration, which some of you may have heard before. I hope there'll be some different aspects here. But I feel like in my life as a teenager, God's given me an illustration. God gave me an illustration, or an illustration that I've used later, even in my own heart, in my own life, of the first car that I bought. So I want to talk to you, and if you've heard this before, you can either go out in the hallway, you can turn on electronic devices, whatever. But first car I owned was a 1954 Chevy Bel Air. Now I don't want to hear, I know I may hear from the Ford Fixer Repair Daily people at the back door. Well, the problem was it was a Chevy. When you're 16, you don't care what you can drive. And nobody here, I know this dates me, you know that today carjackers have been known to leave manual transmission cars that they carjack because you can't drive them. It's a stick shift or whatever. They can't even drive the things. Automatics weren't that new, or were new, weren't that common. So when you went to get your driver's license, you turned 16, and you spent 15 and a half on when you had to take driver's ed in school. You spent that time with a gathering terror hanging over you of the driver's test. You not only had to learn the laws and you had to, take all that stuff, and it was all paper. You didn't have the computerized screen or whatever. But then came the dreaded test you had to drive. And you had to do two things. One, you had to parallel park. Nobody has to do that anymore. But you had to parallel park, which, scared the daylights out of you. Worse than that, you were taken to an incline on the street in Eugene, where I grew up, and you stopped the car, and you had to start it with, stick shift, with the clutch, and, that stuff. And then it would die, and then you'd start it, and the guy's over there with his clipboard. And it was terrorizing. You guys have it too easy today. I know I'm sounding like my parents did at the dinner table. We put cardboard in our shoes during the Depression, walked uphill through snow both ways and to school and all that. But you have it way too easy. Well, the car I bought on a Friday night, and it was on sale on a used car lot. And this is shocking, but the used car dealer didn't tell me the truth. I know that's hard to believe, but I went there at about 8 o'clock with my paper route money saved up. I had gotten my license, passed the terrorizing thing, and I went there at 8 o'clock, and there was this car there, and it was for sale for $250. But they would make a deal, and if I would buy it before they closed at 9, I get it for $200. I had $200, so I bought it. Well, it didn't matter to me to a certain degree, but it was an automatic. That's not cool. But some of my friends also, you're so desperate to get four wheels that you can drive that you could put up with that. I will tell you that driving around with some of my friends, we would literally, especially if other people were watching us or there were girls around, we would accelerate in my car, and then I'd back off the gas, and then so it would sound like it was a stick. Because you got to be cool. And an automatic was not cool. This was an old lady's car. And, it was an old, he said, an unmarried, lifetime school teacher, old lady owned this car. In a brown paper sack in the trunk. I wanted to look in the trunk. Why? Nobody knows, but you do. And there was a pair of old lady shoes. Now, I don't want to get in trouble with, but, I mean, they were old lady shoes. The thick heels and the lace up black, And so I bought a hook, line, and sinker that this, never been in a wreck and never driven over 10 miles an hour in just church and school. All the driving I'd ever done. So I bought it. Well, I discovered some things wrong with it. Pretty serious things. I'll get to that in a minute. But thinking about that car, any car, Chevy designed that car, as any car country, designed it to transport us from point A to point B. And it was supposed to be designed to get us from point A to point B safely, dependably, comfortably, legally. That was its original design. And where it was designed, and to a certain degree where it was built, it's in a perfectly controlled atmosphere. It's in air conditioning and heat in the winter. And if you've ever, all the time I spent back in the Midwest where GM and Ford and Chrysler had factories everywhere, it's a controlled atmosphere. There are all kinds of work rules to keep you safe, and when it gets off the assembly line, it rolls across a nice concrete, clean floor, and it's carefully driven out, and it's parked, and so forth. Everything's just perfect. Somewhere in all that, something goes wrong. There's a parallel here between how God designed us. He designed us to be perfect in a perfect world. No assaults from the outside, no temptation, no disease, no death, nothing. He designed us perfectly in a perfect world that he had also made. But something's now drastically wrong in two ways. That car that I had designed in a perfect atmosphere would now go out the door, not into a perfect world with smooth streets and no storms and no rain and no snow. It would now go out the big bay door at the end of the assembly line into a terribly hostile environment that was against everything it was designed to do. Does that make sense? So now, To get there safely wasn't guaranteed. To get there comfortably wasn't guaranteed. To get there in a reasonable amount of time wasn't guaranteed, because it rolled out into a hostile, very hostile environment. But that wasn't the only thing wrong with that car. I discovered that not only was it in a hostile world, but there was something wrong with it. And here's the core issue that is difficult for us to understand sometimes. Something had gone drastically wrong, not only outwardly, but inwardly. Now let me go back to my driver's license. When I got a driver's license, prior to that, I would have been arrested, who knows what, I'd have gotten ticketed. I had no business driving that car. But I got a license, I passed the test, I showed that I could drive, showed that I knew all the laws, and I promised to abide by them. And so therefore, I was given a certificate that allowed me to drive. In a sense, when we sign up with Jesus, He certifies to us, you're legal in my world. You're right. You've passed the test. You have learned the laws. You've said you'd abide by them. That's what it means to become a Christian. I come to Jesus. I tell Him I'm an alien from Him. I'm not right. I am lost. I'm a mess. If you will take me in, if you will clean me up, I promise to keep your laws. I promise to do as you direct me. He receives me. And I'm legal in God's kingdom. I'm approved in God's kingdom. So I think there's an illustration here then. I was okayed. I was legal. I was approved. I was certified to drive. I discovered that even though, and there was no problems with me at all, but I discovered that all of my certification and my promise to keep the laws and so forth, even if I did that, and I did because I was scared to death to get in the ticket, there was something wrong inside, not just outside, inside. The outside had snow, ice, rain, tilted road levels, ditches on either side, crazy drivers. I was in a hostile world, but I discovered that in that car was something that would go the same way the hostile world wanted me to go. Not only was the road crowned some way or banked in some way or ice and rain, it was slick, it was narrow, but I had something inside that car that wanted to go the same way the roadway and the hostility and the elements pushed me. It wanted to go that way. It had, the salesman that lied to me said it had never been in a wreck. It had been hit by a Burlington Northern locomotive, as far as I found out later, and it had been patched up on the outside. But if you stood back far enough and you looked at what was a passenger side front tire, it was sitting there all cocked because the suspension on the right side had been just messed up from a wreck that he said it never had had. Okay? So it naturally just, it was a hard pull to the ditch. Now, if I put this into the Christian realm, I am in that car. I want to keep the law. I want to be safe. I want to be right. I don't want to get a ticket. Don't want to get in trouble. But I've got something internal that drags me to off the road, to wreckage, to maybe breaking the law, to hurting someone else. It's dangerous. I've got an issue that I am constantly dealing with. And I might think, if I were a Christian, the Christian aim is, well, dive in deeper. As a Christian, we say, well, pray more, read more, go to church more, be in small groups, work hard, go after God with all your heart. I discovered, maybe if I go real fast, this bent to the ditch will kind of go away. It'll clear up. Sometimes you've got a tire out of balance at 40, get to 65 and it clears up. The faster I went, the worse it got. The harder the pull was. So it defeated my effort to do something to get past it, to get over it. Couldn't do it. When we're Christians, but we're born, come into this world with a bent in our hearts toward the ditch, we're still carnal. We're still dealing with the inherited sinful nature that is the fundamental problem to start with. The harder we try to be Christians, the more that will rear its head and defeat me. The faster I try to go, the worse it gets. Now, I discovered when I was driving this bent. I didn't know it was there. But I discovered that there was something internally wrong. And no matter my intentions, no matter my work to keep it, and I had to constantly do that, I discovered that there was the most fundamental law that car was designed to fulfill was basically being defeated. What's its reason? Get me safely, legally, comfortably from point A to point B. That's the basic reason they made that thing. But it was defeating that fundamental purpose. Something was so wrong with it internally that it was defeating that purpose. When our hearts are not, we sing, and those words were great this morning, but we sing, bring me to your heart. Why do we say bring me? Because I can't do it on my own, but I was meant to. I was designed to freely walk after God's heart. But something is so wrong with me now that I can't. And I have to call to God, please bring me where you originally wanted me to voluntarily go. But now I can't. I have a deep bent to the ditch in my heart. It didn't matter then what I tried to do. Of course, I had to be very vigilant. This bent, this drift, this inclination to the ditch in that car was always there. Always. And the faster I went, the more I had to pay attention to it. The more I had to go against it. Most of my attention was making sure that I always had a good grip and could keep that thing from going off to the right. Well, who does that successfully forever? You don't. Okay? I don't know how many times I would be talking or, whatever you're doing, fiddling with the radio and the stuff kids do. Listen, driver's license shouldn't be given out till you're 35, as far as I'm concerned. Anyway, and you know what, this is a clear off the subject, but I think I'm going to be a convert to cryogenics, I think you call it that. Just freeze people till later. When they're about 2, when they're stopped being cute, or 3, just freeze them. And then thaw them out at 25, give them a college degree that they didn't earn, and they're out of the house, okay? Anyway, so you're fooling around. Nobody is able to be that vigilant that constantly. And I would be off onto the gravel banging, and I'd be off onto the ditch. I'd be off onto the shoulder. That's dangerous. More than once, with that thing, I got myself into trouble, especially snow or ice. You hit a bunch of slush, it pulls you one way, but there was something in that car that wanted to go that way. I couldn't defeat that. That's what we find as Christians. We walk in a world that is hostile, that is doing everything it can possibly do to pull me away from Christ. That's bad enough. But when I have something in here that automatically wants to drift away, I'm in trouble. That's what double-mindedness means, that James warns us against and says, cleanse your hearts from it. It'll get you off the road. It will get you in the ditch spiritually. To be constantly then in either as a driver or as a Christian, as a converted but clean hands but not a pure heart, we are consigned to this. This business of always trying to counteract, it preoccupies me. It hinders me. I can't go as rapidly as I want to. It's ultimately dangerous. It is, while, I want you to hear me here, while basically functional, that car got me to school every day. Got me home. It got me everywhere I wanted to go, but not as it was intended. Jesus simply said this, I came not only that you might have life, but that you would have it more abundantly. So was I a griper because I thought, listen, somebody could have said, listen, that car got you where you wanted to go, that's all you can require. Why do you expect any more? You got there, you got to school, big deal. It wasn't what it was intended to be. I hope that makes some sense to us. God made us to joyfully, voluntarily, with our hearts, love Him. Not have a deep inner bent like the hymn I've quoted to you 1,000 times, but it's a great hymn. Come thou fount. Prone to wander. Lord, I feel it. Prone to leave the God I love. That's not talking about a non-Christian. That's not talking about somebody that is leading a life of rebellion. That's someone who loves God, but discovers in here a bent towards a ditch that I cannot get rid of. And I am constantly preoccupied keeping myself out of the ditch, and it's always, at some point, unsuccessful. And so I have to get a major situation, I got to call somebody, I got to get a tow truck, I got to do something to get out of the ditch and get back on the road, only to start the car up and head off again with that same bent still there. The question then we really have to ask, is there a remedy for that? Or is this the best we can ever hope for? Once I discovered what was going on with my car, it bugged me, and I was, of course, like everybody, I was talking about used car salesmen. And then later the dealership burned down, which I didn't have anything to do with, but I wasn't sorry. But at any rate, is there a remedy for that? I got tired enough of my speed being restricted, preoccupied to try to keep that thing running straight. And it was designed to run straight, but now it wouldn't. I got so weary of that. I wanted a remedy. So I checked into what the remedy was. Here's the remedy. One, commit it to someone that knew how to fix it. And in the course of that, I had to give him the keys. I had to trust him that he wouldn't take it to Las Vegas. I had to trust him that he wouldn't scrap it out and sell it for parts to, to a strip down garage. I had to trust him enough that I handed him the keys. Okay? Then I had to pay the price. It was more money than I had. In my case, it was more money than I had, or more money than I wanted to spend. So you know what I did? I didn't fix it. I just settled to put up with it. Lots of Christians do that. They're Christians. There was a day when they turned from their sinning, wicked ways, poured their hearts out to God, asked Him to forgive them. He did. Blessed their hearts with His presence. Turned them around. But they settled into a constant, preoccupying, just try to keep it on the road. Interspersed with occasional failures of getting off the road, getting into the ditch and having to be towed out. And they get tired enough of that. There's two prices that you pay. One is you pay the price of mediocre, putting up with it, up and down, in the ditch, back on the road, in the ditch, back on the road. Hindrances, can't go certain places, can't do certain things, can't get there as quickly. That's a price. God helps us as Christians come to the place where we see, I'm sick of this. But there's a price to fix it. Does that make sense? So I weighed the price. I weighed the cost. The cost for me was too much. I didn't want to go to the cross. I wanted an easier way, a cheaper way. I checked my account, my little savings account, and I wanted that fix to be something that I could easily cover and easily pay, and it wouldn't empty my account. And when I found out that it was going to cost me everything I had, I didn't want to do it. So I didn't. That making sense? When I discover that there is a constant drift in my heart away from the Lord's path, and that to stay on that path, I pay a price. I pay a price of non-abundant life, of mixed motives, of an inner tension and civil war, of a chronic impossibility of following God with all my heart. I still may follow Him all the time, faithfully, keep at it, but it's barely, it's not abundant. Which price do we want to pay? We're going to pay a price. I decided to settle for the old way because in my mind it was cheaper. It was easier. But it was basically failure. I can go to God and give him the keys and tell him, don't call me, don't call me if it goes over so much. Mechanics will do that. I think it's going to be $300. If it's going to be much over that, we'll call you. What I do with my soul is I go to the designer, to the maker, and I say, the price is everything I got. Whatever the cost overruns, I don't care. You do what you got to do. Fix this. Get rid. Align this. All I needed was a massive replacement of the suspension in the front and realign it according to its purpose. In the design rooms in Detroit, they didn't say, let's come up with a car that'll have one wheel cocked and it'll be weird and it'll pull you off and it'll scrub that tire and you'll always be replacing that tire because it wears it out 3 times faster than the other ones. Let's do that. Nobody does that. God doesn't do that. If he's got the original plans, he knows how to fix it. So I'm realigned. Now, quickly, I do want to remind you this. Let's say I'd done that, and that car was, aligned perfectly. And if you're on a perfectly balanced road, you're not in Wheatland where the wind is, and there's no wind, there's no snow, and there's no ice, and there's no rain. That thing will just glide straight. But we don't live in that kind of world. If I had fixed that, put everything I had into it, and fixed that car, I still would have had to face times when the road was tilted. It was banked. It was a mess. It had holes in it. It had all kinds of damage to the surface. It was narrow. There were rocks in the road. There's sleet and snow and rain beating against the windshield. Windshield wipers can't keep up with it. I'd still have to deal with all that. All of the external push to wreck me. But I wouldn't have had to fight also an internal bent to the ditch. When a person gets a pure heart, when God sanctifies our hearts, Paul prayed for the dear Thessalonians, best church he had, good people. He described them. He said, your faith is flourishing, your love works, and you are walking with God, and you're loving your brothers and sisters in Jesus. Well, what in the world's the matter with people like that? We give our eye teeth to have a congregation like that. Paul said, but I'm praying for you. He said, I'm praying that God would entirely purify your heart. There was something still amiss, but God can fix it if I pay a price. If I'm willing to say, Lord, here's the keys, you do whatever you got to do. You change me. I just believe that sometimes we can make a lot as Christians. We can make the issue of being filled with the Spirit for the purpose of cleansing that inner bent out of our hearts. We can make that more difficult than it needs to be. We're the ones that can make it difficult. The story of Jacob, who wrestled with the angel until finally God whacked him and put his hip out of joint. He was that stubborn. He said he wrestled with an angel all night. And finally the angel, I don't know what he did to him, but it says he put his hip out of joint. I've never had a hip out of joint. I hear it's not a pleasant thing to seek. And then God finally got him to where now he wasn't wrestling to bring the angel down. He was hanging on. He He said, just please bless me. Please help me. Please fix me. What was the price? There was a price, and the angels named it. He said, tell me what your name is. His name was Jacob, which means trickster, deceiver. Someone who comes along behind and clips your foot and makes you fall. He had that in his heart. And he said, my name's Jacob. That's what I am down here. What did God do? What did the angel? And it was God that he was wrestling with. Jacob knew it. He named the place Peniel. He said, I've seen God face to face. What did the angel do to him? Immediately, as soon as he admitted, okay, I'm Jacob down here, immediately says, we won't call you that anymore. I'm going to give you a different name, Israel, Prince of God. Because he said, you've gotten what you asked for. And he blessed him there by fixing that bent in his heart. And Jacob was never, ever the same after that. I want us to just bow our heads. Can't say everything I wish I could. But if this is an issue that you know in your heart, you're a Christian, you're certified to drive and be on the road, there's some kind of internal drift that you're always battling. There's a better way. There's an abundant life. There's victory. If that's where you feel you are in your heart, obviously, you don't have to pray here today. Sometimes it's best to just get alone, talk to God, have it out with God, and come to the place where you give up. You hand him the keys. If that's where you are, so I can know to pray for you, and maybe it'll just help yourself to admit where you're at. Anybody just slip your hand up and say, by slipping your hand up, you're saying, I know I'm saved. I'm walking with God. I am doing the best I can to follow in all the light and do what he seems to tell me to do. But I sense that inner bent. I sense that inner drag off into the ditch. I know it's there. I want you to pray for me that God will help me get to the place where I hand him the keys and say, you fix it. I don't care what it costs. Anybody just slip your hand up and say, that's kind of where I'm at. All right? Thank you. Anybody else? Bless your hearts. Listen, there's hope for us. All we have to do, give God the keys. He's never messed up a case yet.